All right, welcome back to CTV News Channel. Some breaking news coming in from the United States. Jurors have found Donald Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, guilty on 8 counts. Guilty on 5 tax fraud charges, 1 charge of hiding foreign bank accounts, and guilty on 2 charges of bank fraud. But Paul Manafort faced 18 different counts, and the jury was unable to come to a unanimous decision on the 8 other counts. So this is what this is going to mean now. Paul Manafort will possibly face prison for the rest of his life. He had been accused of hiding millions of dollars in foreign income that he made in Ukraine and lying on different bank loan applications. During his trial, the prosecution had argued that Paul Manafort lied to keep himself flush with cash and maintain a very luxurious lifestyle. Manafort's defense team implied the whole case against him was politically motivated. He served as the campaign chairman for Donald Trump's presidential campaign for a period of 3 months back in 2016 and was a key architect at the Republican National Convention in which Donald Trump was officially named the nominee of the party. This news, of course, is going to resonate throughout Washington, D.C. and across the United States. The president has said Paul Manafort has been treated very badly in all this, but at the same time has tried to distance himself from Manafort, saying they did not have a close relation at all. Paul Manafort is 69 years old and has deep ties to the Republican Party. They go back to the 1970s. Cory Crowley is standing by live. He is a Republican strategist amid this breaking news. Cory, what do you think? 8 charges guilty.
Well, this is tough for the president's overall narrative, Todd. First of all, it's a huge distraction. At a time, don't forget, he called for the Republican-controlled Senate to stay in session in the month of August when they're typically gone, so that they could confirm his judges, so that they could start the initial work on his latest Supreme Court nominee, so that they could do spending bills. And this is a huge distraction from that agenda that he's trying to push during this critical month as we lead up to really the final 2 months prior to the midterm elections. Also, you know, there was, of course, news today that his personal lawyer, Cohen, is going to be going before a grand jury himself here very shortly and pleading guilty. And so it starts to feel like you got to ask the question, could this be the start of the dominoes falling against President Trump?
How bad is this, Cory, for Paul Manafort himself?
Well, I think, you know, look, he's going to end up in jail, if not for the rest of his life, then for the rest of his life that is significant. You know, maybe he'd get out in 10, 15 years. But at that point, he's in his 80s. And how much of a life is there to live? And you leave, of course, stripped of all credibility, of probably most of your wealth. They're going to find ways to take this back to pay restitution. And so that lavish lifestyle he worked so hard to provide for and to hide is now going to be gone by the wayside permanently.
I mean, this is such a fall from grace for Paul Manafort, a man who really fancied himself a power broker, not only in your country, but also, of course, in Ukraine, where he did a lot of work for different unsavory characters, you might say, in that country. The other thing is, and this gets even worse for Paul Manafort, he faces another trial, as you know, in September on other charges. And we're hearing that prosecutors have got 3 times the evidence to present in that next trial. Again, that relates to some of the activities that he did when he worked in Ukraine.
Yeah, and I would think, Todd, that if the sentence comes back pretty harsh for this current set of allegations, that maybe he just pleads guilty, or maybe he tries to find a way to lessen the extent of that other trial. If you already know you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison, why bother to fight these things? Except, I guess, that spending time in a courtroom is time you don't have to spend behind bars. So maybe there is some incentive to dragging out a long trial. You still get to wear a nice suit and show up in court.
The next trial is on foreign lobbying, rules that he's alleged to have broken, and also money laundering charges as well. The date is September the 17th. We'll see, of course, if that becomes a moving target as a result of this guilty verdict now. If you are the White House and you're watching this news, Cory, what's going through the mind of the president and his top advisors?
Well, I think there's reason for concern. Now, as you noted in your intro, they have distanced themselves from Manafort over the last few weeks and even the last couple of months, and they've tried to paint him as somebody who's been a longtime Republican activist. Of course, he worked for Ronald Reagan, a Republican darling, and others in the party, so he's not new. It's not like Donald Trump brought him to the dance. So there is that ability to distance yourself. I think what's more disconcerting is Cohen, the president's lawyer, maybe having a possible plea deal, but definitely him pleading guilty. And where does that lead the rest of this investigation and the rest of what the special counsel is doing? And you see the president going hard on the attack against people, including the White House's own lawyer, the White House counsel. And that's not that unlike what President Nixon was doing at about this same time in his own investigations during Watergate years ago. And so it's really bringing back ghosts of the past for the American public. And I think giving pause to even people who had been longtime supporters of the president. Of course, that 25 to 35% of the electorate that's with him is going to be with him no matter what happens in these trials. But I think for those swing voters who decide elections, this is giving them pause.
Right. And for viewers who are just joining us, we just want to bring them up to speed here that Paul Manafort, former campaign chair of Donald Trump, has been found guilty on 8 out of 18 counts. Those counts relating to a number of financial crimes that Manafort committed, 5 tax fraud charges, 1 charge of hiding foreign bank accounts, 2 charges of bank fraud. We want to be clear, though, Cory, and this is really important to emphasize, that none of these crimes happened as part of his work for the Trump campaign. This goes back years before. So again, there is certainly an argument that the White House can make, and they can say, listen, Paul Manafort did this long before he ever signed on to our presidential campaign.
They can, Todd, but I think it also goes to the matter of judgment with this president and with those people he's surrounded himself with. It was well known what Manafort was doing. It was well known that he was working in Ukraine and that he had these shady business dealings abroad, including with Russia, before he joined the president's campaign, and yet they chose to bring him on board. You know, and it's not that different to the spat we see with Omarosa. You know, the president talks bad about his own attorney general. He's now talking bad today and yesterday about the current Fed chairman who he appointed. So you've got to at some point say to yourself, but the president surrounded himself with these people by choice. And what does that say about his own judgment?
All right, and we're just getting this as well coming in, Cory. You were talking a little bit before about how, in your mind, the bigger issue here had to do with Donald Trump's personal lawyer and longtime fixer, Michael Cohen. We're now getting news here of the plea deal that involves Michael Cohen and what exactly that could mean. Why is that, in your mind, a bigger cause for concern for the Trump presidency?
Well, I think for a couple of reasons. One, we know that he recorded conversations with the president, and we don't know how many more of those recordings exist or that he may have given over as part of a plea deal or what he may have testified to. You know, he was the president's lawyer long before he was even candidate Trump, but back when he was just Trump, the TV personality and the real estate mogul in New York City. So it's going to be interesting to see what that plea deal entails. There are some rumors out by the New York Times that he didn't cave, that it was just a pure guilty plea. If that turns out to be the case, then maybe there's less for the president to worry about. But I think in any case, having somebody who is that intimately involved, you know, with Manafort, the president's able to say, hey, he worked on my campaign for 3 months. He was a Republican guy I brought on board at other people's recommendations. But Cohen is somebody who's been a longtime confidant of this president.
All right, now this is just coming in, Cory, and I know you're getting this firsthand from us, so I want to read this very carefully, but we're talking about this plea deal. Here's what we're hearing, that Michael Cohen, former Trump lawyer, fixer, has pled guilty to 8 criminal counts, including 2 violations of campaign finance laws. Cohen says he violated campaign law at the direction of the candidate, says he acted for the purpose of influencing election. Cohen says he violated campaign law at the direction of an unnamed candidate. So some of that is, of course, legalese, and we're going to try to break it down here. But this is what we're getting, pleading guilty to 8 criminal counts, including 2 counts violating campaign finance laws. What do you make of that, Cory?
Well, there's only one candidate that can be. And don't forget, until they just had this proceeding in the last hour, Cohen himself was referred to as John Doe by the court and by all the court's paperwork. So it's not that shocking that they're not naming the candidate. But we all know what candidate he worked for and which candidate was reported to have had a relation with Stormy Daniels and to have been paid off to the tune of $130,000. So it would appear, and again, I'm hearing this for the first time from you, but it would appear from this that the president is definitely implicated. And I think that this could be the start of a house of cards that comes tumbling rather quickly.
When we talk about a plea deal, Cory, just in layman's terms, does this mean that Michael Cohen may have had something to offer to the prosecutors or not necessarily?
I think certainly from that language, it sounds like he did. And we all know that he had something to offer. He's got tapes. He's got this long relationship and all of this knowledge and knowledge of the interactions with the president and that the president's had with other people. The question, I think, was always, would he turn on the president if forced to? And he gave an interview about a month ago and said that he'd put his family and himself first. And I think that that would lead us all to believe that he did turn on the president. And if he's saying, I did this at the direction of the candidate, he's certainly not falling on the sword and saying, I did this because I thought it was the right thing to do at the time. He's saying he was told to do it.
We have heard, of course, as well, as it relates to Michael Cohen, that this is the one that the White House could potentially be more concerned about, sort of on par with the Russia investigation, simply because Michael Cohen was so close to Donald Trump long before he ever became president. He was his quote-unquote attack dog. He was his fixer. When there was an issue that Donald Trump needed to be resolved, Michael Cohen became very good at getting rid of problems.
Yeah, I think, Todd, this person, Cohen, because of his personal relationship and because he was the personal lawyer, and then the other person of great concern, a shoe we haven't yet felt drop, is the White House counsel, who we know has spent 30 hours at least with the special investigator and the special counsel talking about this. And it's important to remember the White House counsel is not the president's lawyer. The White House counsel's job and obligation is to the office of the presidency and to the American public. So there's no reason to believe that if he knew of wrongdoing taking place, that he wouldn't have very quickly thrown the president under the bus. His responsibility is not to Donald Trump, the man. It's to the office of the presidency, which is far more important than one person.
So where does this go from here now, Cory?
Well, I think we see what happens. We'll see what the media fallout is. The president has announced over the course of the next month a series of 16 campaign rallies in various states, presumably for people who are vulnerable in the midterm elections. So I think we see what his message is personally out on the stump and how that resonates with his own supporters. And that's going to be the real key here, is do enough of the people who went out and voted for Donald Trump, giving him the benefit of the doubt, turn now and vote against him in the midterm elections, which will be the first real indicator we get that his base is weak? Or do they stick with him and support the candidates he gives his full-throated endorsement to?
Cory, great to have you with us, and we appreciate you taking the time to come on the program amid this breaking news. Thank you.
Glad to be with you, Tom.